508 AD. This is a study of the date 508 AD being a start date of two prophecies in Daniel 12 and is crucial to understanding the daily as paganism. Established from the daily presentation, we saw that the pioneer view, the daily, is paganism, devil worship. In other words, the daily is the continual warfare of Satan against God and his people. The modern view, the daily, is the continual mediation of Jesus Christ, an astounding transformation by theologians with the twisting of the daily. The new view is really Satan impersonating Jesus as the ministering high priest, Satan's ultimate goal. Plant his throne in the sides of the north and be worshiped. We know near the close of Earth's history, Satan will physically impersonate Jesus on earth, which is, in my opinion, the omega of the alpha false daily teaching. Now, why is it important to know the truth? The startling fact that this modern view, the new view, changes the prophetic dates in the book of Daniel, the very framework of the Adventist message. The new view changes the beginning and the close of the 1260, 1290, and 1335 day prophecies. They are all moved out of their place and put back 5 years. In the old view, they all fit together perfectly and all have been fulfilled. We can trust Bible prophecy. What is rejected by the General Conference regarding the 508 AD start date? Paganism removed in 508, but instead makes it either 5 years earlier or 5 years later. The daily is the mediation of Christ's ministry in heaven. The 1290 and the 1335 have not been fulfilled and instead pushes them into the future. In addition to rejecting the 50 AD start date of two prophecies, the 1290 and 1335, the General Conference also rejects the 538 start date of the 1260-year rule of papacy. The key players in history in this prophecy: God, the Bible prophecy of Daniel and God's people, 10 pagan kingdoms of Daniel, 7 are Trinitarian Catholic religion. 3 of the 10 kingdoms are Arian religion, the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. And then we have General Flavius Belisarius with a wicked wife of intrigue, and Emperor Justinian of Rome, who also has a wicked wife of intrigue. And then there were the popes, with the papacy waiting in the wings, pulling all the strings. History is prophecy fulfilled. So the question becomes, which history? As we saw in the 1919 Bible Conference Part 2, Ellen White would send her secretaries to the library of the major universities and have them search for the historical proof of her statements she made based on the visions God gave her. She said history was being replaced by Catholic history, and that was 1910, making Spirit of Prophecy even more valuable in our day than in hers because it contains true history. The victors have rewritten the history books. If if I know where to look online, I can find the true history. If I give an exact search reference, the truth is there, buried amongst all the Catholicized versions. So here we have the slide from the 1919 Bible Conference Part 2, where D.E. Robinson, who was her secretary, gave this statement on why Ellen White authorized the 1911 Great Controversy. And this is where he said, in the revision of the Great Controversy, we went to the library and compared these points that were raised one by one. There were really over 100 questions that had been raised. We went carefully into the libraries at Stanford and Berkeley. In some instances where strong quotations were made regarding the claims of the papacy, she took the position for making the change not because it was not true, the statement she had made, but because of the fact that the papacy had succeeded in destroying the evidence, and it was very difficult to find the things that would back it up. And in some cases, she suggested alteration because of that. In one instance, I do not remember the details, the evidence was found several months afterwards, but the change had been made already. It is a fact that in history, as well as in science, modern ideas are being molded largely by the papacy, and apologies are made, and history is being covered up today. And I feel that we should be cautioned against taking statements by some of the modern historians as against the great controversy. We will see that this is repeating over and over, and especially in our study today. We're going to introduce true history books, The Great Controversy by Ellen White, which was inspired, Facts of Our Faith by Christian Edwardson, Empires of Prophecy by A.T. Jones, written before he apostatized, Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith, Daniel 11 presentation by B.G. Wilkinson, and then letters and presentations by J.S. Washburn and Claude Holmes. Our opening statement, Pagan Rome fell, 10 kingdoms divided. The kingdom was now divided, 10 kingdoms, 10 distinct and independent nations, no more, no less, had fixed themselves within the boundaries of Western Rome, and the prophecy, spoken and written more than 1,000 years before, was literally fulfilled. All flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man is as the flower of grass. The grass withereth, and the flower thereof falleth away. Nations rise and nations fall. Empires rule the world and are brought to ruin. But over it all there appears the fact that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and also the truth that the word of our God shall stand forever. A.T. Jones, Great Empires of Prophecy, 1891. Pagan Rome did not fall overnight, nor did papal Rome assume the throne overnight. How did it happen? And what is the connection with the 508 AD date and the Daily of Daniel, and why does it matter? Well, a little background, suppression versus unity of the truth. From 1891, let's now go to 1922. 1922 suppression. The General Conference published the Attainment Manual and revised the 1890 Bible Readings Book, changing the prophetic framework all the pioneers agreed upon. Bible readings was heavily promoted by the General Conference, although Daniel and Revelation was the most demanded book by the people, as also the Great Controversy. The book, Ellen White said, the people needed the most, and it was kept buried in the basement for years by the General Conference before being pressured to promote it. Then 2026, the General Conference Corporation wants you to think the modern view of the daily and the prophecies of Daniel have always been understood as the modern view. But we have shown this is not the case. And now we'll look at the mid to late 1800s, where there was unity. The early pioneers, with James and Ellen White, were united in the truth of the old pioneer view on the daily and on Daniel 11, King of the North, and the King James Bible, and infallibility of the spirit of prophecy. What were the prophecies attached to the daily? What was the prophetic framework established by the pioneers? J.S. Washburn stated, the denominational teaching is now and always has been that the 1260 years of Daniel's seventh chapter began in 538 and ended in 1798, that the 1290 years began in 508 and ended in 1798, and that the 1335 years of Daniel 12 began in 508 and ended in 1843. The prophet said, we should believe on their word. But the waymarks which have made us what we are to be preserved, and they will be preserved as God has signified through his word and the testimonies of his Spirit. Ellen White says that the pioneer Advent movement was under the influence of the Spirit of God, and were men that spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit, and that God was leading them to do this special work in the very fulfillment of prophecy, and we should believe on their word. So let us have a little overview of what we just read. The modern view changes the prophetic framework, moving the start dates. The modern view dominates. It smears the old view. God blessed the old pioneer view in church, and the prophet said it was the correct view, and we must watch for the waymarks. Which I'd like to take a moment to sing this song by Effie Belden, Look for the Waymarks. Look for the waymarks as you journey on. Look for the waymarks passing one by one. Down through the ages, past the kingdoms four. Where are we standing? Look the waymarks o'er. First the Assyrian kingdom ruled the world. Then Medo-Persia's banners were unfurled. And after Greece held universal sway, Rome seized the scepter. Where are we today? Down in the feet of iron and of clay, weak and divided, soon to pass away. What will the next great glorious drama be? Christ and his coming and eternity. Look for the waymarks, the great prophetic waymarks, down through the ages, past the kingdoms four. Look for the waymarks, the great prophetic waymarks. The journey's almost o'er. Back to our study. What exactly is this prophetic framework? Our chart next shows all 5 of the major prophecies of Daniel. 3 are moved out of their place by the modernists. We have our 2300-day prophecy with a 457 start date, our 70-week prophecy, 457 start date, the 1260 with a 538 start date, and the 1290 with our 508 start date, and the 1335 508 start date. Here is our 2300-day prophecy chart, and you see that all the prophecies fit perfectly together within the 2300-day prophecy. We will be looking at this more in detail as we go through our study. The truth is not confusing. The daily, as we have studied, and as Haskell perfectly said, he would not give a hill of beans for the daily because it wasn't a big deal, except it had been changed and made into a big deal, a big fat lie by the modernists, Prescott and Conradi, It got the second generation, Washburn, Holmes, and Wilkinson, to fight it till their dying breath. Modernists made it confusing, and we must now unravel their naughty mess first and then get into the true history, proving the pioneer view has been fulfilled. Remember, history is prophecy fulfilled. So we're going to give an overview first of these two positions. We're going to look briefly at two writings, one by Washburn, who remarks about a new Adventist book. Remember, Ellen White prophesied books of a new order would take place after her death, and so they did. And then we're going to compare it with another writing by Prescott. We will see the new daily problems clearly and wittingly pointed out by Washburn regarding the 508 start date. Then you will see Prescott's unpublished pamphlet he circulated on his view of the daily, and we will point out three absurd positions he takes that leads him and others way off course. Washburn's letter, Mist and Moonshine. The new edition of Bible Readings teaches that the 1260 days began in 533 or 534 or 535 or 536 or 537 or 538 and ended in 1798 or 1794 or 1795 or 1796 or 1797. This book also teaches that the 1290 days began in 503 or 504 or 505 or 506 or 508 and ended in the same indefinite, hazy way as the 1260 days. Bible Readings teaches that the 1335 days began in the same indefinite, uncertain manner as the 1260 and ended in 1838 or 1839 or 1840 or 1841 or 1842 or 1843. All these fundamental foundation prophetic periods began in mist and ended in moonshine. Further, the book Bible Readings teaches that the 2300 days ended with or at the same time as the 1335 days. And it is true that the 1335 days brings us to the time when Daniel was to stand in his lot, that is, the investigative judgment, as also the 2300 days. They reach to the same event. Then this great foundation prophecy also must have ended in the fog of a 5-year sliding scale in 1838 or 1839 or 1840 or 1841 or 1842 or 1843. And then it must have always begun in the same dim, uncertain way in this sliding scale, anywhere you please, from BC 452 to 457, and then Christ was crucified in the midst of a prophetic week, which began or did not begin anywhere from AD 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, or 27 to 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, or 39. Thus, the very cross of Christ is moved out of place, and every block and pin of our whole prophetic framework is moved, shifted, and twisted by this absurd, slippery, slimy, sliding scale. Woe to him who shall move a block or stir a pin of these messages. Contrast the pioneer view of Washburn's pamphlet with now the modernist view of Prescott's pamphlet. Now, the presenter gives a summary of the rejections made by Prescott's pamphlet, TheDaily, first, before we actually read what he wrote. So here's a summary. Conradi brought in the New Daily back in the 1890s with the rejection of the 508 AD start date for the prophecies in Daniel 12 regarding the 1290 and the 1335. Prescott followed in Conradi's footsteps not Christ's. Prescott rejected the history Uriah Smith used in Revelation and Daniel, bringing in theologians and contrary history. Prescott rejected the use of the King James Bible and chose another to support his view. Prescott rejected the use of spirit of prophecy and sola scriptura line upon line approach with understanding Daniel regarding the daily and the King of the North. Sadly, Prescott's work laid the modernist foundation of the Seventh-day Adventist General Conference on prophecy. So now we're going to get into Prescott's pamphlet, The Daily, where he appeals to the learned men and the modernized Bible, the American Authorized Standard Version of 1901, over the King James Bible as proof that the pioneer view of daily as paganism based on the 508 start date is wrong according to Prescott. So this is a photocopy of his writing. In our exposition of the 8th chapter of Daniel, we have used the text of the American Standard Revised Version, which in substance is the same as the English Revised Version, Lesser's Jewish translation, and some of the latest and best foreign translations. These translations are based upon the best modern scholarship and have commanded the respect of all Bible scholars. In the effort, however, to maintain that the daily means paganism and that it was taken away in AD 508, the writers of these two leaflets have presented special translations made by themselves for the purpose of sustaining their own views and have attempted to make these translations overthrow our view of this prophecy. The Revised Version, according to J.S. Washburn, the Revised Version is not the true complete Word of God. First, because it is not all there, and second, because it is not all there straight. He says, we have seen that the reason why Professor Prescott uses the ARV is because it teaches the apostate Conradi's doctrine of the daily. Presenter notes again. Prescott replaces the translator's supplied word sacrifice with Prescott's supplied word mediation, so that it, according to him, reads better and is simpler, end quote. However, this is not what God inspired the prophet Daniel to write. Daniel was inspired by God to not use the supplied word sacrifice and to alternate in the passage showing which part of the little horn was acting out, showing a counterfeit and a true with two hosts, two sanctuaries, two princes, two worships, and the transformation of pagan Rome into papal Rome, where it is more fully pagan as papal Rome, being in a Christian garb to hide its paganism so it can better deceive. Papal Rome was even more pagan than pagan Rome. Papal Rome lifted up. Papal Rome exalted paganism in its man-made traditions and superstitions, all hidden behind a false costume of Christianity. True blasphemy. It is not simple. It takes prayerful study using the King James Bible in a line upon line approach. Using a theologian, a commentary, a lexicon will only lead you to confusion and the wrong interpretation based on men and not the Holy Spirit of God, leading you into all truth. The next two slides are Prescott giving his interpretation using his modern ASV version of a Bible and his replacing a supplied word with another supplied word that he made up. And it, the little horn, the papacy, waxed great even to the host of heaven, the people of God. And some of the hosts, the people of God, and of the stars, their leaders, it, the little horn, cast down to the ground and trampled upon them. Yea, it, the little horn, magnified itself even to the prince of the host, Christ, and it, the little horn, took away from Christ the continual mediation, and the place of Christ's sanctuary, the heavenly sanctuary, was cast down. And the host, the people of God, was given over to it, the little horn, together with the continual mediation through transgression. And it, the little horn, cast down the truth to the ground, and it, the little horn, did its pleasure and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said unto that certain one who spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the continual mediation and the transgression that maketh desolate, the same transgression as in verse 12, to give both the sanctuary, the heavenly sanctuary, and the host, the people of God, to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 evenings and mornings, then shall the sanctuary, the heavenly sanctuary, be cleansed. Now, our key takeaways presenting the issues of the modern view. First, Washburn shows modernists change prophetic start dates of the 508 for the 1290 and the 1335 prophecy, and also the 538 for the 1260 prophecy, the slippery 5-year sliding scale. 2. Prescott's 3 absurd errors with his new modern daily. First, he appeals to the learned men, the theologians, and he replaces the King James Bible with the Authorized Revised Standard Version. And he replaced a supplied word by the translators in the King James Version of sacrifice with his own supplied word of mediation. Let us not make the same mistake that this writer here said. Jerome, to the greatest loss of posterity, did not dig deep into the history of the text. Let us not trust the learned men. Let us use the same history that those who were blessed by God used to understand this all-important prophecy of Daniel. Let us go back in time to prove the 508 start date is accurate, and it is a bloody history. We must introduce the key players before going into history that proves the 508 start date for the end of paganism, which then took 30 years to fulfill. We're going to focus on the prophecy today, not the incredible drama that went on between the wives of the Roman general Belisarius and Emperor Justinian. Much intrigue and deception, and it is hard to separate what was dramatization by the historians from what was actually the truth. History surrounding them reads like a fiction novel, or more like a Hollywood movie script with seduction, gross perverted infidelity, and murder, all for power and control. Let us look at a famous Byzantine mosaic to get acquainted with the players in this prophecy, and it is a victory picture after the Arians had been uprooted. So here we see front and center. In the very center is Emperor Justinian. And then we see to his left a gentleman here. Now look at this photo. There's symbols all through this photo to study. Prominently right next to the emperor, with the others behind the emperor, the figure identified as Bishop Maximanius of Ravenna, in powerful position from 546 to 556 AD, who sponsored the mosaic's construction. He is the only one named in the artwork. The mosaic, completed around 547 AD, is one of the most significant visual records of Justinian's court and the Byzantine imperial presence in Italy during the reign of Justinian I. The papacy at this time did not have as much power as it did until after the Byzantine Empire. Now, then there was this gentleman behind both of those two we just talked about. Who was he? His name was Narses. Narses was the right-hand man of the emperor, and he was a eunuch, and he was very powerful. So he was a eunuch from Armenia. He was one of the most prominent military and political figures in the Byzantine Empire. And he was born 478, and he rose from a simple palace eunuch to become the Grand Chamberlain, the highest ranking eunuch office, and a trusted advisor to the emperor. He governed Italy as a prefect, restoring imperial administration and tax collection. His success was due to his exceptional logistics, political acumen, and the trust Justinian placed in him, knowing a eunuch could never claim the throne. Prior to 538, Emperor Justinian ruled both religiously and civilly the pagan Roman Empire. He issued laws against heretics, giving them insufficient time of only 3 months, either to become Orthodox or go to exile. When they went to exile, it was with nothing. They left everything behind. The Byzantines ruled over 200 years over Eastern Rome from Constantinople, and Western Rome was the papacy located in Rome. Justinian's conquest began 2 centuries called the Byzantine papacy because the Byzantine monarchs dominated the papacy. The Western Empire spoke Latin and the Eastern Empire spoke Greek. The Greek language dominated the empire with far more Easterners in power, and this was very important in the selection of who would liberate Rome, choosing someone who spoke Latin, not Greek, so he would be accepted by the people there. That's a very good lesson for us to pay attention to as we watch world events unfold. Emperor Justinian and his wicked wife Theodora here. This is what is pictured front and center. Now we look at General Belisarius on the other side of Emperor Justinian. He also had the wicked wife. Her name was Antonina. Flavius Belisarius, he was almost likable. Flavius Belisarius, 505 to 565. He lived 60 years. He stands as one of history's greatest military minds, loyal to the emperor. Born in what is now Bulgaria, Belisarius rose from a relatively humble background to lead campaigns that defined an era. Renowned for his innovative strategies and disciplined leadership, he earned the title of Last of the Romans, preserving classical ideals of honor and military excellence, and he refused to be the emperor of the Western Roman Empire when he was given the choice. Belisarius was a man who commanded the army and fought to restore the glory of Rome when most of the empire was already gone. Serving under Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century, he won battles from the deserts of Persia to the plains of Italy. He crushed enemies far stronger in number, and yet he died without the wealth or powers of his victories, which might have earned him. Belisarius's military successes never shielded him from the intrigues of the imperial court. His relationship with the eunuch Narses, remember he was the emperor's right-hand man, was quite tense, and the emperor's wife Theodora viewed him with suspicion. In 562, he was accused of corruption, likely a politically motivated charge by her against him. He was briefly imprisoned, stripped of all command. Although Justinian eventually pardoned him, the episode tarnished his final years. A later legend claimed he was blinded and forced to beg in the streets of Constantinople, crying, "Give an obol to Belisarius." Modern historians agree the story is almost certainly apocryphal, invented centuries later to illustrate the ingratitude of rulers. I'm not so sure about that. Here we have a famous painting, Belisarius receiving arms. Western and Eastern Roman Empire. Just to give you a visual, we touched on this in the daily presentation part 1, but you see here to the left, Catholics were situated primarily in Rome. The Western Empire was predominantly Catholic and it was Latin speaking. But then we go to the east and we have the Byzantines located in Constantinople. They were Greek speaking. Now, what are all the dots about on this picture? Well, these were the barbarian invaders, and you can see they were heavy in the Western Empire. So the Eastern Empire, it was one of the reasons they were stronger. They weren't having to fight the barbarians so much. But then later we would see they would have to fight Islam. Now, the key takeaways from what we've just looked at, the players. So we saw that in this whole 508 AD plot, this whole prophecy of Daniel, we have these players, Emperor Justinian and his wicked wife Theodora, General Belisarius and his wicked wife Antonio. And I will tell you, if you were to go and read about this time period, you would get a greater understanding of what was actually happening in the Western and Eastern Roman Empire and why the 508 was such a big deal and why the Arians were such a big deal. We have of a lesser role in our study, Narses, Emperor's right-hand man. Justinian ruled from Constantinople in the east over the weaker Western Empire whose capital was in Rome, and this time period is near the end of the pagan Roman Empire, and the papacy was rising. Now, our homework for the next part of the study is studying Daniel chapter 2, the 10 toes, and then looking at Daniel chapter 7, the 10 horns. I'm going to assume you've already studied these, so we'll continue on today. If not, stop and go read those two chapters. Now let us turn our attention to 508 prophecy start date. Daniel 7:8. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were three of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Who were the three horns, and when were they plucked up? Well, here are our 10 kingdoms, the fall of the pagan Roman Empire. We have the Alemanni, which is now Germany. We have the Franks, now France. The Burgundians, now Switzerland. The Suevi, Portugal. The Visigoths, Spain. The Lombards, Italy. Anglo-Saxons, England. Heruli, Vandals, Ostrogoths, all extinct. Three horns uprooted. Heruli, Vandals, and Ostrogoths. Why? Why could they not live peacefully coexisting? Why did they have to be uprooted? It was not until I studied all the bloody battles over who controlled the churches and who was allowed to live in the kingdom that I learned why. Jones explains that by the 5th and 6th centuries, the term Arian had become a catch-all label for any Christian who rejected the Nicene Creed. Most of these Arians likely never read a single word written by Arius. They simply held to a simpler faith that emphasized the supremacy of the Father. But it makes you wonder, why did they have to be obliterated? Three horns were uprooted. Why could they not peacefully coexist? Pagan Rome ruled from 168 BC to 476 AD, the fourth kingdom in Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 7. The 10 kingdoms were established 476, ruling until a complete transformation took place with the little horn. There were three Aryan kingdoms of the 10 kingdoms within pagan Rome, and these three kingdoms prevented the papacy from assuming the ruling throne. A kingdom divided cannot stand, and the 10 kingdoms were completely divided between the three Aryan kingdoms and the 7 Trinitarian kingdoms. It was a religious war primarily, with monetary and control interest. These two religions were opposed to each other. There was no union, and the divide was getting inflamed by the Pope and the clergy. 508 AD started the prophecy timeline of the three Aryan kingdoms' removal, the taking away of paganism to bring in papal Rome. First the Heruli, then the Vandals, and then the Ostrogoths were removed in that order. Let us look briefly at how because it is the same tactic the papacy has always used and is using now in the world. This study just barely covers the tip of the iceberg. The events that took place are very interesting for further study, and thankfully, we heavily depend on pioneer history and the book Facts of Our Faith and its references for the true history we are about to read. So first we'll start with the Heruli and this King Odoacer. King Odoacer was an Arian Heruli king, and he was up against four entities: the Pope, Simplicus, Trinitarian and Catholic, and then the Emperor Theodosius, Catholic supporter, and the people follow the Pope because they all go to his church and give him allegiance. And then there were the Ostrogoths. Heruli under King Odoacer, Italy 476 AD, reigned during Pope Simplicus, and Emperor Theodosius ruled, who issued edicts for the Catholic religion and made it illegal to be otherwise. So here we have a division over control between a king and on the other side, the Pope and the Emperor. And don't forget, there is the other player, the people. The king was under the emperor. The people were under the influence of the pope. When the pope died, bloodshed erupted. King Odoacer attempted to have a new pope who would support him put in place. This backfired, and the emperor, under the influence of the pagan church, called in another player, the Ostrogoths, to remove the Heruli. You would think the Ostrogoths would recognize they were just a pawn in a power play, but no, they could not foresee they would suffer the same fate. Note, the papacy roused the people to turn and reject the king from office, and the people refused to allow him refuge in the city. History leaves no room for doubt but that the papacy, through its allies, engineered this act. Now let us look at the Vandals, Genserico. Now that the Heruli are removed, Pope and Emperor turn their attention on the Vandals of Africa. The Vandals oppressed the Catholics. Genseric, also known as Genseric or Gaiseric, was the greatest king of the Vandals, who remained undefeated from the time he took the throne until his death. That was approximately 50 years. The Vandal form of Arian Christianity, which incorporated aspects of Christianity into the old Germanic paganism of the tribe. Arians were still pagan, not purely Christian. Now, Genseric was very cruel, and here is just one account from an incredible historian before he apostatized, A.T. Jones, about him from his book, The Great Empires of Prophecy, 1898. Quote, in AD 451, Attila, with an immense army, made a raid into Gaul, and the Ostrogoths went with him. The way in which it was brought about was this. Theodoric was at that time king of the Visigoths in their country in southwestern Gaul. His two daughters were given in marriage to the eldest sons of the kings of the Suevi and of the Vandals, who reigned in Spain and Africa. The one who married the son of the king of the Vandals thus became the daughter-in-law of the terrible Genseric. The cruel Genseric suspected that his son's wife had conspired to poison him. The supposed crime was punished by the amputation of her nose and ears, and the unhappy daughter of Theodoric was ignominiously returned to the court of Toulouse in that deformed and mutilated condition. This horrid act, which must seem incredible to a civilized age, drew tears from every spectator, but Theodoric was urged by the feelings of a parent and a king to revenge such irreparable injuries. Internet presents a glossed over version of how these kingdoms were, as if because they rejected Catholicism, specifically the Trinity, that they were good and truly Christian. This is not the case, as we just read one atrocious example. Vandals, pagan gods Odin and Thor, turn into Christian God and Jesus. In the Vandal pagan belief system, Odin was king of the gods, and all others were below him. And so, in the Vandal form of Christianity, there was only one supreme God, and Jesus filled the same role that Thor had previously as son of the highest God. The concept of three equally powerful deities reigning as one God was totally unacceptable to Gesseric, as it violated everything he believed concerning the divine. No Catholics were allowed to serve in his government, and every government official had to be a loyal Arian who believed in precisely what Gesseric believed. These persecutions, however, did not interfere with his rule, and the Vandal king flourished. The Vandals' last king, Gelimer. The last king of the Vandals was Gelimer, who defeated by Belisarius at the battles of AD Decimum and Tricameron in 533. Gelimer fled the field, but was hunted down and captured. Afterwards, he was brought in chains to Constantinople, where he was featured in Belisarius's triumphal parade through the streets and then released. Interesting tidbit, if true. Upon King Gelimer's capture and the overthrow of the Vandals, General Belisarius brought King Gelimer and all the spoils back to Constantinople. Legend has it, wagons carried the spoils of war, including the menorah, that sacred seven-branched candlestick, which was brought to Rome by Titus in AD 71 from the Temple of Jerusalem, and which had then been taken to Carthage by King Gesseric nearly a century ago. Gelimer was led into the hippodrome in chains to the cheers of Roman citizens, where he saw an emperor seated on a throne at the end of the hippodrome. He said, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." The last king of the Vandals is said to have murmured as he groveled in the dust beside his conqueror. How Rome operated then is how Rome operates now. Belisarius. One incident of many will be given as an example of how Rome took out the Vandals, the second removed of the three Arian kingdoms as prophesied. I could not find this on Google, only in the trusted book, Facts of Our Faith. Belisarius landed on the African coast at 9 days' march from Carthage. He did not assume the attitude of a conqueror, but came, as he said, as the deliverer of the Catholics and the Romans, the clergy and the lay proprietors, who were all equally oppressed by these foreign barbarians, the heretic Vandals. Thus, Belisarius won the enthusiastic support of a large part of the population. To undermine the zeal of the Vandal leaders for their king, he sent the leading men of the Vandals a letter from Justinian, stating that he only intended to dethrone the usurping king, who was tyrannizing over them, and to give them back their liberty. The letter reads, "It is not our purpose to go to war with the Vandals, nor are we breaking our treaty with Gesseric. We are only attempting to overthrow your tyrant, who, making light of Gesseric's testament, keeps your king a prisoner. Therefore join us in freeing yourselves from a tyranny so wicked that you may enjoy peace and liberty. We give you pledge, in the name of God, that we will give you these blessings." And the overseer of the public post deserted and delivered all the horses to Belisarius. But Emperor Justinian never intended to keep his solemn oath to grant them liberty, and the people soon found Rome the severest of all tyrants. In 533, Belisarius landed in Africa, and the Vandals were several times defeated, and Carthage was entered in 533. 534, it was restored to Rome. Arians were spoiled, churches destroyed, lands and goods confiscated, and the Vandals ceased to exist. Belisarius now turns his attention to the last of the three horns. Barely had he completed this mission with uprooting the Vandals when he received another to destroy the Ostrogothic kingdom. There were two Goths, the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. The Ostrogoths came from an eastern group of Germanic people. Their name refers to Eastern Goth, or the Goths that are glorified by the sun. On the other hand, the term Visigoth refers to the Western Goths, and they would convert to Trinitarians. We have this missionary, Eutychus, to the Ostrogoths, 311 to 382 AD. Just a little interesting side note. This missionary invented a Gothic alphabet and translated the Bible into their language, sparking a movement that eventually led to the conversion of most of the Germanic tribes to Arian Christianity. Much of his Gothic translations of the Gospels and Pauline letters survive, together with fragments of his book of Nehemiah. And although he reputedly translated the whole Bible except the book of Kings, the extent of his work cannot be ascertained. He didn't want to translate the book of Kings because the Ostrogoths, the Goths, were quite a violent war people, and he felt that the book of Kings would try to inspire them in their violence. So he decided to leave that one out. These people first became known in history as a tribe that settled in an area surrounding the Black Sea. They made frequent attacks on Roman provinces, which gave them an image of being resilient and persistent nuisance to the Roman Empire. However, the invasion of the Huns proved to be a major threat to the Romans, and it was during the Huns' conquest that a large percentage of the Ostrogoths sought support and protection by the empire under the rule of Valens. These people then became Visigoths, while the rest of the Goths endured the harsh treatment of the Huns while maintaining a sense of autonomy. The Ostrogoths rose to power. When Attila the Hun died, the Ostrogoths finally had their chance to become independent, and this is where they are charted on the biblical timeline with world history. Thus, in 474 AD, Theodoric was appointed as ruler of the Ostrogoths, and with the support from the Byzantine Empire, he led a campaign to invade Italy. And at that time, the Byzantine Empire was hoping to regain the victory that was Rome's. Theodoric defeated the Herulite king Odoacer, and he established an Ostrogothic empire from Sicily to Spain, Italy, and France. The empire remained successful because of his impressive political skills. Roman literature, culture, and art were also widely accepted. And while his campaigns were financially supported by the Byzantines, he was given an opportunity to independently rule his empire and ensure wholesome relations with the Eastern Roman Empire. After the rule of Theodoric, his daughter assumed the throne. She then ruled as the first regent and queen when her son Athalaric died. However, Theodor-Hadad ordered for her to be assassinated, and this sparked anger to the Byzantine emperor ruler Justinian I. Hence, he sent Flavius Belisarius to Italy and reorganized the region, including the empire. Justinian made an offer to the Ostrogoths, and he allowed the Ostrogoths to remain an independent kingdom if they give him 50% of the treasury. Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoth nation of Italy, maintained complete religious liberty for all classes and creeds, unlike the Vandals did. He wrote to Emperor Justinian, "To pretend to a domination over the conscience is to usurp the prerogative of God. The most dangerous heresy is that of a sovereign who separates himself from part of his subjects because they believe not according to his belief." Theodoric's wise and firm rule and strict religious liberty in Italy brought peace prosperity, and happiness to all classes. He brought the country to such a state of greatness that her precious sufferings were no longer recognizable. Beginning of the end for the Ostrogoths. How did it happen? Let us learn another lesson from history, reminding you that Rome never changes. The same tactic Rome used with these three horns, she is using today. The Arian bishops stood apart from one another in stupid and ignorant isolation, quote unquote. The Catholics, however, were united in one purpose, and that was the overthrow of the Arians at all cost. Emperor Justinian issued severe laws against Arians in 524 AD with a concerted effort of Pope and Emperor by fire, sword, and exile to exterminate Arianism, which awakened Theodoric. But his time had come to an end, and he died. It was too late. Pope Silverius swore one of those Catholic solemn oaths of fealty to the new king of the Ostrogoths, Witigis, in 536. His capital was in Ravenna, Italy, not Rome. Justinian sent Belisarius to offer to Vitigis the peaceful surrender of the city of Rome, which was under Witigis's control. However, Belisarius did not come by himself. He came with 7,500 men to destroy the last of the Arians. Rome, as usual to her nature, betrayed Viticus. Catholics throughout all the city, in high and low places, remember prior Ostrogoth King Theodoric's tolerance policy. That's why they were there. All these Catholics awaited Belisarius, and they threw open the gates of the city to Belisarius and his 7,500 men, and then cried out, "Down with Arianism!" when Belisarius entered the city. These Catholics were rewarded for their treason. But let all remember that the success of Justinian's invasion was due to the clergy, along with the chief men of the city corresponding with them. Final attempt to overthrow Rome by the Ostrogoths. King Vitigis then sieged Rome, but in 538 AD fled from Ravenna, his capital, marking the end of paganism, since there was no other Arian nation to oppose the rising papacy. Yes, there were a few Ostrogoths and a few skirmishes later, but no nation and no ruling power to oppose the papacy from rising. It has been said of this event, quote, "Then occurred a single phenomenon, the annihilation and disappearance of a great and powerful people from the world's history." End quote. Prophecy of Daniel 7:8. Pagan Rome uprooting three kingdoms, the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths, and the prophecy of Daniel 8:14, the taking away of the daily paganism, was fulfilled. Rome now had complete control, converting all the kingdoms from paganism into Catholicism, which is paganism under a garb of Christianity. History is prophecy fulfilled. Key takeaways: how Rome took away the three horns. Let us recap what we've just learned. The two major players on the offense, Trinitarian Justinian Emperor and Byzantine Eastern Roman Empire, and Belisarius, his general, who did not speak Greek and therefore could be accepted by the Roman West while he was loyal to the Eastern Roman Emperor. Three kingdoms were taken out. How? Arian Heruli, kings, taken out by the Ostrogoths, and the people were stirred up by the Catholics against the king. And then we had the Arian Vandals. The kings were taken out by Emperor Justinian's letter of false pretense and stirring up the people religiously against the Arians. Belisarius attacked the Arians with support from Catholic people. And then the Arian Ostrogoths. The kings were taken out by Belisarius with fake letters from the Pope and using the clergy and the Catholic people to open the gates and let Belisarius in with his army. We know from inspiration that the people in the future are going to demand Sunday legislation. They will be stirred up by the religious leaders, just like we saw with these kingdoms. Notice how the attack on the three horns progressed from the papacy in the wings, getting another kingdom to take out a kingdom, the rising papacy getting an emperor to send letters and stir up the papal loyal Catholic people, and the third kingdom using pope letter and clergy in addition to the people. It took 30 years from 508 to 538, which fulfilled the 1260-year prophecy. But you see from this history that pagan Rome took out these three kingdoms as prophesied in Daniel 7:8, with influence from the papal Rome that was in the wings, not yet on the throne. Now that we have presented the history, let us take another look at this prophecy timeline. Now we study the prophetic chart to confirm this history just presented is prophecy fulfilled. Look at Daniel 12, two prophecies of 1290 and 1335. Daniel 12:11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Daniel 12:12. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. Here is our 2300-day prophecy chart, and you can see clearly, right there smack dab in the middle of the 2300-day prophecy is the 508 start date. Papacy plucking up three Arian kings begins. So we have the 1290 from that point, the very first of the prophecies of the two we're looking at, and it ended in 1798 with the papacy receiving a deadly wound, Revelation 13. And then we have the 1335, the second of these two prophecies in Daniel 12, beginning in 508 and ending in 1843. Blessed is he who waiteth and cometh to the 1335 days. Daniel 12:13. We'll take a closer look at each of these two prophecies and then the 1260. 1290. Daniel 12:11. And from the time that paganism shall be taken away and the papacy set up, there shall be 1,290 years. The time paganism is taken away in 508 AD marks the beginning of it, so that papacy will be set up in 538 and is then taken away by Napoleon's General Berthier in 1798, removing his nation status and giving him a deadly wound. Revelation 13:14. The 1335 is just as simple to understand. Daniel 12:12. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. Beginning in 508 AD, add 1335, and you come to 1843, the year before the cleansing of the sanctuary. Was not an accident. It was a great blessing to those who dug deep into the scriptures to learn more of the sanctuary. Notice the wording, he that waiteth and cometh. It was not low-hanging fruit. It was shaking of the people's faith. Who would believe and cling to God and the Word amongst great ridicule and scorn, and not trust themselves, but turn to God? The first and second angel's message proved to be a great blessing for all who waited for it and accepted it as truth. They came to that understanding and they stood for it. and they were blessed by it. And then we have the 1260. History is prophecy fulfilled. The 1260 prophecy right in the middle of the 1290 and the 1335. If you get the first two wrong, the 1290 and the 1335, you will get the 1260 wrong. All the Daniel prophecies go together and fit like a Rubik's Cube. Here's our prophecy chart again. AD 508 does not impact the 2300-day prophecy, but fits perfectly within it, as does the 1260, beginning in 538 and ending in 1798. This was the papal reign. So let us look at this 538 date, because it is hotly contested in modern Adventism, as is the 508. However, there was complete union about both these dates with the early Adventist pioneers and James and Ellen White. The old pioneer view, there was perfect unity. Beginning of the 1260, 538 AD. 538 establishes beginning of papal Rome, the second phase of the little horn. This is probably the most important part of this whole presentation. But two more events had to happen to secure this date of 538 as the beginning of papal supreme rule. Along with the elimination of Arian king from power, a change in the little horn occurred. A new order of popes occurred. Down to the 6th century, all popes are declared saints in the martyrologies. Pope Vigilus, 537 to 555, is the first of a series of popes who no longer bear this title, which is henceforth sparingly conferred. From this time on, the popes are more and more enveloped in worldly events, no longer belong solely to the church. They are men of the state and then rulers of the state. And let us look a little deeper into the second change that occurred in 538 AD. Notice he's not holding a sword. The Seventh-day Adventist Church General Conference spiritualizes the prophecies and states 538 AD has no evidence as the beginning of the papacy from a military viewpoint, stating Ostrogoths regained Rome 2 decades later. However, the change was in legal, not military scope. The governing framework changed in 538. In the Great Controversy, Ellen White simply wrote that in the 6th century, quote, the bishops of Rome was declared to be the head over the entire church. Paganism had given place to the papacy. The dragon had given to the beast his power, his seat, and his great authority, and now began the 1260 years of papal oppression. Daniel 7:25. Here, Ellen White focuses on the moment of empowerment with legal authority. It was a legal change, not military. In a nutshell, the Justinian Code, which was completed in 534, enacted Orthodox Christianity into law, placed the Pope as the formal head of Christendom, ordered all Christian groups to submit to his authority, and gave him civil power of life and death over heretics. Now think about America. What made her different from all the other nations? What was she established with? A military? No, a legal framework of the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Given into his hand. Given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. Daniel 7:25. The key moment related to the time period is not something the little horn does to conquer or assert itself. Rather, the focus is on the time that the little horn is given certain authority and dominion. This would best be fulfilled by a legal act of another bestowing authority, which is precisely what the Justinian Code did. Case closed. Legal change. It was then that the provisions of the code elevating the papacy could actually be implemented by Belisarius beyond the borders of Rome itself. The Gothic Wars continued, with the Ostrogoths being finally driven out in 553, but these later battles and sieges did not nullify the papal-centered legal system that had been put in place in 538. Even when Rome fell again to the Goths, they did not control the papacy, as at that time it was operating outside Rome. After 538, the papacy never came back under the control of the Ostrogothic kings. There is a clear and parallel symmetry in the 1260-year period. Notice this. Starting with a pope being exiled and replaced with one hand-picked by the emperor under the auspices of a new legal code, the Justinian Code, the one that elevates the Roman Church to official legal priority, compared with ending with a pope being exiled by an emperor and a religious code replaced by a secular rule. The Napoleonic Code, a secular system that rejects the idea of a special place for the church. How ironic is that? 538 established as the beginning of papal Rome, the second phase of the Little Horn. Even Wiki says this about Pope Vigilus and the papacy. While Vigilus was formally installed in March 537, his papacy became fully effective in 538 AD, the year Silverius died on the island of Palmyra. 538 is established. The 1931 article in Ministry Magazine by C.P. Bowman, who was at the 1919 Bible Conference. He quotes, "The mighty movements of history that fulfill major prophetic predictions do not come to pass suddenly. There is always a groundwork of preparatory events leading up to the crucial event foretold. Often it is difficult to put the finger on a single event that marks a great transition hour. Frequently, a group of events cluster about and lead up cumulatively to the pivotal point, as is in the case of that fateful year, 538. The game is true concerning the terminus in the 1798 of the outstanding 1260-year prophetic period, but the divine measuring rod laid down on these two clusters of events marks out precisely 1260 years. Our emphasis denominationally upon 538 is therefore justified from every reasonable point of view." And in the article, he states, the year 538 has this further claim as marking the beginning of the 1260 years of the prophecy of Daniel 7:25, that it fits in perfectly with the receiving of the deadly wound or the stroke of the sword, Revelation 13:14, by the papacy 1798. Paganism taken away really means paganism now cunningly disguised as being cloaked in Christianity, so that papal Rome is even more pagan than pagan Rome. And we will close with this statement from history. The popes filled the place of the vacant emperors of Rome, inheriting their prestige and titles from paganism. Constantine left all to the Bishop of Rome. The papacy is but the ghost of the deceased Roman Empire, sitting crowned upon its grave. Epilogue. How were the Aryans pagan? C.P. Bolgan, sorry, C.P. Bowman was at the 1919 Bible Conference said in 1931 Ministry Magazine, quote, "It is said by many that it was paganism that hindered the full development of the papacy. And in a sense, that is true. But it is not all the truth. The gross paganism of the earlier centuries of Christianity was taken away in the days of Theodosius, but it was speedily replaced not by the pure spiritual religion of Christ, but largely by Arianism, a religion as spiritless and as political as Romanism itself, and withal quite as ready to appeal to the sword as were even the popes. Arianism was essentially paganism, only in a Christian garb." End quote. So there is one loose end to tie up. Who was Arius? And how did the Arians become known as his followers? Were they really following in Arius's footsteps? We know so little of Arius, of whom much blood was shed over whom those who are called Arians are said in a derogatory manner. Much political battles leading to much violence surround him. The war between the Trinitarians and the Arians as to who would control the pagan Roman Empire raged. The victors have surely written the history books about him after they burned all his writings, so that just a few survived. And in those few writings, there was a wonderful statement he made about Jesus having a beginning, that he was begotten. And that one concept started a bloody war that goes on until this day. Even Arius's death is a mystery, and one where I strongly believe he was murdered. Let us briefly look at Arius's death. A.T. Jones said, "The return of Arius to Alexandria was the cause of continued tumult, and he was called to Constantinople. At the request of the emperor, Arius presented a new confession of faith, which proved satisfactory, and Constantine commanded a bishop of Constantinople to receive Arius to the fellowship of the church on a day of public worship. It happened to be a Sabbath on which day, as well as Sunday, public worship was held at Constantinople. The bishop absolutely refused to admit him. The Arians, under the authority of the emperor, threatened that next day, Sunday, they would force their way into the church and compel the admission of Arius to full membership in good and regular standing. Upon this, the Athanasian party took refuge in prayer, and the bishop prayed earnestly that rather than the church should be so disgraced, Arius might die. And naturally enough, Arius died on the evening of the same day. So the picture shows just how Arius died. Look closely. What do you see here going on? You see him bent over and his pants are down, and it looks like his intestines are coming out of him. This was written by those who were against Arius. Arius paraded through the city, surrounded by a body of his Eusebian partisans, and as he approached the place called the Forum of Constantine, a terror arising from the consciousness of his crimes seized him, and with the terror a violent relaxation of the bowels. He therefore inquired whether there was a convenient place near, and being directed to the back of the forum, he hastened thither. Soon after, a faintness came over him, and together with the evacuations, his bowels protruded, followed by a copious hemorrhage and the descent of the smaller intestines. Moreover, portions of his spleen and liver were brought off in the effusion of blood, so that he almost immediately died. A.T. Jones states, in Constantinople, where men were familiar with the Asiatic crimes, there was more than a suspicion of poison. But when Alexander's party proclaimed that his prayer had been answered, they forgot what then that prayer must have been, and that the difference is little between praying for the death of a man and compassing it. Let us note that in the history of the era, Asiatic, often used interchangeably with Oriental, was a term used to characterize the Byzantine court as a palace of shadows, deceit, and subtle violence, while a Western or Roman crime might involve an open sword. An Asiatic crime involved the apothecary or the kitchen. And here we have three such poisons in his days: arsenic and wolfsbane and mercury salts, the king of poisons, the queen of poisons. Yeah, seems very likely. Joan said, what happened after? The Athanasians looked upon the death of Arius as a miracle and a direct judgment of God upon a heretic. They compared it to the death of Judas Iscariot. Alexander himself, in a prayer of thanksgiving, said, to thee, O Lord, I give thanks that thou hast heard my prayer and hast not allowed the church to be polluted by the presence of a heretic. The death of Arius, occurring as it did and at the time that it did, was, of course, interpreted by the Athanasians as a direct judgment of God. Athanasius himself declared, the Lord, having judged the Arian heresy, has shown that it is not only inconsistent with the Christian faith, but it is the very same as that of the traitor Judas. It is definitely worthy of more study. For 400 years after Arius's death, Arianism continued through the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Goths. But what was it? Was it really as Arius believed? It is worthy of study into the life of Arius, what we can see from those who controlled the writings of and about him, and the bloody battles that surrounded this man, and those who would dare proclaim boldly that Christ was begotten, that he had a beginning.